Hey, how we doing? All right, so we're going to take a look at a ventricular tachycardia and try to follow through step by step with some rules that we can take a look at. So our first thing, and of course our first and foremost, is to take a look and see whether or not the EKG strip is readable. Now, when I talk about readable, all we're asking is, can I identify some waves? And in this case, I can see that there are QRS complexes. Doesn't appear to be a whole lot of artifacts, so I'm pretty good at that being readable. My next question is going to be, are there P waves present or absent? And as I take a look at this EKG strip, I notice that there appears to be no P waves. So I'm going to circle absent. Now, I want to bring up one little factor here for you, okay? So that little factor is that if I were to take a look at the heart, okay, so if I take the heart and I realize that the way that the heart is designed is that the fastest pacemaker is going to work. So in the case of what we're dealing with here is that somewhere down in these Purkinje fibers, in the ventricles, is a pacemaker site that is firing pretty fast. So this is the pacemaker that is winning. Okay, so it is currently winning. If that is winning, it does not necessarily shut off the SA node, which is firing up in here. If that SA node is still firing at 60 to 100 times a minute, every once in a while, you are probably going to see what appears to be a P wave up there. And again, the only reason that that is going to be there is because we're now talking about the communication in the heart only comes down. It doesn't go back up. So therefore, the atria has not shut off. It is still firing. We just are not able to see that P wave. Therefore, as a result, we have no ability to be able to identify whether or not there's a P wave for every QRS, if there is a QRS for every P, and therefore we cannot identify what the PR interval is to see whether or not it's constant or regular. So that's why we're going to block those things out just like that. Now our next subject, or our next area, is going to be whether or not that QRS complex is going to be regular or irregular. So in this case, we're going to take our calipers. We're going to get our calipers here, and we're going to bring our calipers in, and we're going to start measuring a R to R. When I measure that R to R, all I'm looking for is to see whether or not it is going to remain regular. And if I move this down, I do know that so far it appears to be regular. Now, every once in a while it appears just like, not quite there. Every once in a while it appears that it might be maybe half of a block off, maybe like right there. That's acceptable because the rate that we're going, it's okay every once in a while to see that there's a little R to R issue here because of how our system is playing. So usually, R to R variability is related to sinus rhythms, and it's just the way that they would normally go. This one, when we say that it's essentially regular, if I take a look here, it is pretty darn close, less than half of a block off. So that's why I'm going to say that this is regular. So in this case, our QRS duration, or our QRS, is regular. And I'm now going to look at my QRS duration. So my QRS duration, I'm just going to grab a QRS complex here. And if I grab my QRS complex, and I now start to bring this together, and now I'm going to say that looks pretty darn close. I'm at just about 5 blocks. So 5 times 4 is 0.20. So in this case, my QRS duration, just for following the rule, if it is greater than a 0.12, then we're actually saying that it's probably coming out of the ventricle. So that 0.12, in this case, we saw that it was a 0.20. So I want to make sure that it is actually wide. So I'm just going to make sure that I am pretty consistent as I come down through. And this is where I usually say this is the art of interpretation, because you want to measure it at the same spot as frequently as possible. And one thing that I can point out to you is going to be about right here. you will notice that I'm pretty much following along this nice little heavy line with the graph paper behind here for the ECG. Now I'm going to move up here and I'm going to take a look at my ventricular rate. And my ventricular rate is going to end up being, probably could have did this earlier, but my ventricular rate, if I were to go move this, okay, so let's take a look at this. So here's where my QRS complex is going to be, right? Here's my next QRS complex. So 300, 150, so I'm looking at a ventricular rate of 150 beats per minute. Okay, so I'm looking at a ventricular rate of 150 beats per minute, and I should be pretty good with that now showing me that I have a wide QRS complex, and that becomes a hallmark right here, okay, is that I have this wide QRS complex, and I have a rate that is somewhere around at least 150 or greater. Okay, so usually it's 150 or greater that starts to make it that ventricular tachycardia. So it tells me again that I am dealing with a ventricular rhythm. It is the width of the QRS complex. Remember, it has to be greater than a 0.12. And I also am looking at a rate that is typically greater than 150. And I like the fact that it is also regular. So when I notice that it is regular, I may or may not have P waves that are present. I have a QRS duration that is greater than 0.12. I have a ventricular rate that is greater than 150. I am now looking at a ventricular tachycardia. Hope this helps. Talk to you soon.